first principles first. Oh, that makes sense. Ideas that we use in debate. This may seem simple. It certainly isn't profound. It's not part of practice when we discuss issues of discourse-based arguments. Sometimes it's not practice when we do what's conventional. We take arguments. We use them in debates. We produce an advantage that reveals to a judge that there is a choice. Thank you. My work here is done. We take arguments, we use them in a debate to produce an advantage that requires a choice. Let me just have this as a preamble to a discussion about discourse-based arguments, including narratives and irony, about what I mean by those elements. When I'm referring to an argument, I'm talking about the best possible expression of your ideas, that it expresses a particular and focused point of view, that it has elements that are both logical and persuasive, because after all, individuals are both rational and irrational, and not in a pejorative sense. They are simply emotive creatures. We appreciate the world based on its irrationality and our own every bit as much, if not more, than the way in which we focus our rational selves. And this is an important issue because many people, as we will explore, are confused about ideas associated with narratives, ironic presentations, music and dance in debates, because it's not used as arguments. Secondly, we use it in a debate, which means it's like other arguments. It is like other arguments. This means that you can actually make a presentation for the affirmative or for the negative in which you include discourse-based arguments and a lot of other stuff. If you want to have 3 or 4 other critiques, if you want to present a couple of disadvantages, you've got a topicality argument. As long as these things are consistent, you are able to present them. If you want to, when you're on the affirmative, you can have advantages that are discourse-based and advantages, as long as we understand them slightly differently, that are more conventional. We use it the same way we use other arguments in a debate. And the arguments in a debate need to function. They need to function as disadvantages. All arguments in a debate on the negative should function as disadvantages. Obviously, the flip side, when we're on the affirmative, all the arguments should function as advantages. Why is that true? No matter what we call them, that's the way they function. Well, here's why. The original presentation in a debate expresses a point of view in which the speaker says, pay attention to me, and you will find salvation. And it might be because your agency is going to save hundreds of thousands of lives. It might be because you're paying attention to someone who has something profound to say about the topic. It might be because you're going to suborn a particular interpretation of the topic based on a powerful autobiographical delivery. There are all kinds of ways in which you might agree, but ultimately you're agreeing with that person because they are expressing the good. What's the negative got to do? They've got to argue against that. And the way to argue against that is to say, they're not good, they're bad. And so arguments in a debate function as advantages or disadvantages. Again, this seems awfully simple. And don't you already know this? But my experience in practice is that this is not what occurs in debates, particularly with discourse-based arguments. You must produce an advantage. You must produce an advantage. Again, one in the context of debate. It's not about generating discussion when you advance a discourse-based arguments. By the way, a lot of this applies to different kinds of critiquing. It's not about informing the judge. Oh, excuse me, you look like a person who doesn't know that racism is a bad thing. Let me tell you, racism is a bad thing. It's not about informing the judge. It is not about promoting social activism. Now, these things may be ancillary benefits to one's presentation in a debate. You might be able to, as a consequence of a debate, generate a powerful discussion. You may be able to inform social activism as part of a debate. That's not what it's about. What it's about is winning a debate. And so you are trying to produce an advantage in a debate, a relative position in a debate. We have the opportunity to discuss ideas, do we not? We have plenty of opportunities to discuss ideas. We have plenty of opportunities, if we would choose to take advantage of them, to inform the people that we define as judges. And we also have all kinds of opportunities to promote social activism. But the interesting thing is, in all other avenues of your life, you don't try to do all these things at the same time. Why do we believe that a debate is supposed to do all this stuff at the same time? We show up at debate tournaments to debate, and I think we need to have some patience and humility about the project associated with debate. I think it's perfectly fine to say, I'm engaged in debate. That there are great advantages associated with that. And there are fabulous skills to develop associated with one's advocacy in a debate. I think it's perfectly fine to say that. I don't think it has to be part of a larger project when one is in the debate round. And so it's important for you to take into consideration that you're trying to win a debate. And it requires choice. Again, it is not simply the expression of an opinion. It's the expression of an opinion that is going to undermine the ideas of the opponent. We are not, with discourse-based arguments, engaged in plan argumentation. Oh, you've got an idea? Well, you know, I've got an idea too. Spiritualism is a good thing. And the Native Americans have a different understanding of spiritualism from Christianity. And so I'd like to talk about that. Or the Native Americans engage in powwows, and that includes competitive dance. I'll engage in a competitive dance. What is it about these ideas that undermines the position that competes with the position that's established in the debate? It's absolutely essential that these elements are part of one's presentation. After all, we are not trying to create a cult. And there is a cult associated with narrative. Perhaps you've participated in the cult. We can't tell. I don't know if everyone here is wearing Adidas and waiting for the spaceships to take them up. Oh, some are. Thank you, Chris, for self-identifying. And the issue for debate, both in individual rounds and as a community, is to treat these kinds of arguments the same way we treat all kinds of arguments. You have an educative responsibility in addition. As a debater, judges are informed by the practice of debaters. It doesn't work the other way around. Judges are informed by the practice of debaters. It means you have to be precise in the way in which you advance arguments, and when you are, you can inform judges about the way in which they should receive information. I think judges have received a lot of bad information about these kinds of ideas, and it happens because of this cult that has developed about narrative argument. Have you heard or experienced this kind of thing at a debate tournament? A group of people, they're hugging, they're weeping, they're talking to each other, and they say, I think we convinced the judge to give a double win in the debate. That was the most profound experience. Someone told a story, and because they told a story, now we're moved and we're weeping. And I always wonder about that. What's going on with that dynamic? After all, in the debates immediately prior, they're talking about the loss of tens or hundreds of thousands of lives. And that doesn't count. That doesn't move them. But you hear a story as if that should move people. A story. Is this the first time you've heard a story? Haven't you grown up your entire life listening to stories? What moves people about the idea of stories in a debate? I think it's faddish or fetishist or cultish. And I think we need to move away from that. That's the preamble. Here's the amble. Where did it all go wrong? Where did we get so confused? We're debating positions on the affirmative that should be on the negative, and negative issues that should be on the affirmative. Let's talk about the affirmative adopting policies. What? They're implementing policies and saving lives? What? You remember those. You know, the miracle of the third round at Northwestern. Judge voted for the affirmative team. 100,000 people were saved. Threw away the affirmative case. Move on to the next debate. We have to have another affirmative. We've saved all those lives. Let's move on from that issue. We're not saving lives. We're not doing that on the affirmative. People, if they are honest, patient, and humble, recognize this as part of their argument. And so the issues that are frequently raised by the negative in a debate, fiat is illusory. Yeah, damn right it is. I don't know why affirmatives talk about it at all. Why don't the affirmatives say, we're not saving any lives, we're making a presentation, and if anybody listened to me, this policy might save a lot of lives. But I recognize no one's listening to me because it's Sunday morning in a filthy classroom in a city that has more bail bonds than any other industry. And so that is the reality of debate. What about this issue of discourse? The negative in the debate keeps saying the debate's all about language, it's about the here and now. Why isn't the affirmative saying that in the debate? And if the affirmative adopts the rhetoric and argumentation typically offered by the negative, it puts them in a better position to win. Why? Because they capture all the arguments from the negative side of the debate that are based on the assumption that there's a difference between the affirmative side and the negative side, and the difference is the negative is talking about something in a meaningful way in the debate, they're narrating, and the affirmative is pretending to be something they ain't. They're policymakers. And in that difference is power for the negative. And if the affirmative makes the first move, who interprets the debate? It's not the negative. The negative doesn't interpret the debate. They don't get to say, here's what the debate means. The first interpretive move in the debate is made by the affirmative. They interpret the topic in the debate. And so if the affirmative says, it's all about discourse, and fiat's illusory, and my speech is my speech, it is my narration, mine, I'm the speaker, I'm delivering it, this is my story, and I have taken information to support my story about this topic, you subvert all of the oppositional arguments that are based on difference between claiming to be a policymaker, claiming to save lives, and what they claim is just talking, but in a meaningful way, about the debate. If we take a couple of examples, there's a lot of evidence on this topic that refers to Indian country and Native Americans and American Indians and tribes, and there's a literature for all of this that says, we shouldn't refer to Indian country and Native Americans and American Indians and tribes. And so what are you going to do on the affirmative? Are you really planning to debate on the affirmative, in which every debate in which you're involved, you'll just have to admit, okay, we've got our affirmative, we think it's a good idea, and we'll probably never talk about it because in every debate, all our evidence is going to say Indian country, Native Americans, American Indians, or tribes, and somebody's going to run a language critique against us. And we're going to have to struggle through that, the equivalent of having a wet burlap sack tied around your head and then hitting the head with a phone book round after round. We're going to have to struggle through that to make the claim that we think is valuable about this topic. Why would anyone select that as a strategy? What you should do is make the first move. Fiat's illusory. I don't even know what you're talking about when you're talking about fiat. We debate the word should in the topic. It's a hypothetical conditional. I don't have to claim that I'm saving any lives. All I'm saying is what I say matters and the way in which it matters. If somebody will listen to me, we might save lives if you want to have a conventional approach and still get the benefits associated with narration and co-opt the arguments for the negative. And what would happen in a debate where you did this? Okay, you're reading evidence that refers to all of these terms, and the negative team in the debate says, you can't say that, you've said a naughty word. And that's the basis for their argument. And what do you say in reply? Well, you believe that it's bad. And why do you believe it's bad? Because you're not critically engaged. You are not critically engaged. You are not doing the method that you demand in critical thinking. You are not uncovering what's going on in the first affirmative constructive. You are focusing on the explicit rather than the implicit. You are operating at a superficial level. That's what's going on in your argument. It is the rejection of critical thinking. Because you know what? This is what we mean. We thought about this issue. We are reinventing the way in which we're discussing. Indian country, Native Americans, American Indians, and tribes. And that's what it means in the context of this case. And if you've made the first interpretive move, you can take that position in the debate and you can defeat all these arguments. You can reveal how they are double turns. But if you do the conventional stuff, good luck to you. And let me just say that the burlap sack and the phone book are a painful experience to have at a minimum of 4 times per tournament. We are always narrating. We are always narrating. We cannot escape from it because it's part of the way in which we live experience. And I always think it's important to read evidence when I make a presentation. And I'll read some evidence for you. This is Roland Barthes. If you haven't read Barthes, B-A-R-T-H-E-S, I think you should. He's got a lot to say about the nature of language. He is someone connected quite strongly with the development of semiotics as a discipline, and he's very clever and challenging. And I think that an investigation of Barthes will lead to some powerful claims about what goes on in debate. This is what Barthes has to say about narration. The narratives of the world are numberless. No ground for the other side. Able to be carried by articulated language, spoken or written, fixed or moving images, gestures, and the ordered mixture of all these substances. Narrative is present in myth, legend, fable, tale, novella, epic, history, tragedy, drama, comedy, mime, painting. Think of Carpaccio's St. Ursula. Are you thinking of Carpaccio's St. Ursula? Are you thinking of Carpaccio's St. Ursula? Bart wants you to do that. Stained glass windows, cinema, comics, news items, conversation. Moreover, narrative is present in every age, in every place, in every society, and there is nowhere, nor has there ever been, a people without narrative. You're always doing it. You're always doing it. Get over your mental illness. Stop claiming to save lives. Start telling people what you're doing. I'm telling a story, and I'm proud of it. I wrote this case. It's not an expert opinion. You know how it's not an expert opinion? I'm not an expert. That's why I'm relying on information from other sources. And when I collected that information, what method did I use? What method did I use to collect the information? Did I use an expert method to go through and examine the literature on the topic to carefully construct my argument? No, it's a debate-free fire zone. It's slash and burn. That's the way in which you construct evidence. And what do? You identify evidence by keywords. A literature review based on keywords. There's no standardization of methodology. There's no standardization of data. By the way, these are arguments about the way in which you're not an expert, so you can answer this critique of expertise. And you demonstrate some humility associated with your claims. You can resolve a lot of denial and a messianic complex by telling people precisely what you're doing when you make a presentation in a debate. I am not saving lives. I am telling a story. It's my story. I'm proud of that story, and you should listen to it. And if language is the matrix of debate life, it's the foundation, then we need to have a method of making these kinds of arguments. And so I want to talk about the way in which narratives might distinguish themselves from the conventional approaches to debate, even though I've already said you can continue to do what you do in a conventional argument, but make sure that you capture or anticipate many of the critiques that are based on difference simply by making a narrative move when you understand the first affirmative. But there are some other narratives that make some additional moves in the opening speech, and I think you're aware of some of those. The inclusion of poetry, an autobiographical story, etc. These kinds of moves are done so for, I think, additional reasons. Let's talk about them. There are 2 primary reasons in which those ideas are expressed in a debate. The first is to change the compositional method. The compositional method of the construction of a first affirmative constructive. And, let me just say this. I don't want to say affirmative and negative for all these arguments. You can use the arguments on either side. But if we just say a first affirmative who's presenting a narrative, They're trying to change the compositional method. Let's move away from the stock issues. Let's move away from the conventional formulaic presentation of 1AC, and let's get it together and listen to this kind of presentation that might be dramatically different. The second thing that they're trying to accomplish is that they're trying to orient a choice for the self. It's not about the judge. It's not about the other side. It's about the way in which they're trying to orient the choice for themselves. It's about the story that that individual is expressing. And what they're trying to do is reveal that choice to other people. That's the point of a narrative. It is not, and please don't do this, and this is the same with any kind of discourse-based argument or critique, it is not to put the other people in a debate in an inferior position. It is not a tool for subjugation. It ought to be a tool for liberation, not subjugation. You don't dominate with it. You don't tell the judge, here's what we're going to do in the debate. We're going to try to educate you. You know, you're a captive audience. We'll educate you. And then at the end of the debate, if you agree with us, and you indicate using your ballot to demonstrate that you've been educated, then you agree with us. And now you are relieved of your racism and sexism and homophobia and Christianity and any other problem that you have. That's not appropriate in a debate, nor is it about the other side. You're not trying to educate them. They're your foils in the debate. They don't really matter. You're communicating with the judge in a debate. And so it's important to include as part of this kind of construction, not only a different compositional method, it looks different than other ideas, but you're included in it in some ways. And Montoya says this about discourse-based arguments. He argues that new discursive formats enable us to reinvent ourselves. Now, why would you want to do that? Here's the reason why. Helen's already talked to you, has she, about social constructionism? No one?
Yeah.
Helen Morgan, she's on the faculty at the World Debate Institute, and she has a lecture on thinking critiques.
Yeah.
And yes?
No, that was,
Yeah.
that was in the advanced lab.
Okay, so she has not yet spoken to you. This is why cross-ex is so tough. Can you get a yes or no answer?
She spoke to us about critiques, but I don't know if she went specifically into that one they're referring to.
Okay, but the issue is we need to reinvent ourselves. Why do we have to reinvent ourselves? You know why? Because we are racist, we are sexist, we are homophobes. And the reason for that, we absorb all the information from our culture. And we are not constructing ourselves independently of outside influences. And we have unconscious and subconscious biases, and you have to resist it. And you have to work at it all the time. It's necessary to reinvent yourself. And so these discursive formats help you to reinvent yourselves. For example, it might be the way in which you express your complicity in the persecution of people who don't have the same kind of privileges to which you are entitled. We can reject the dualistic mask that we shrank behind, seize instead our multiple, contradictory, and ambiguous identities. And as we reinvent ourselves, we import words and concepts into discourse from formerly prohibited languages and taboo knowledge. The disruption of hegemonic tranquility, and wouldn't that be nice? The disruption of hegemonic tranquility, the ambiguity of discursive variability, the cacophony of polyglot voices. This is what you should be reading, by the way, this card, when you do speaking drills. The chaos of radical pluralism are the desired byproducts. The pursuit with its emphasis on our histories, our ancestries, and our past experiences can give us renewed appreciation for who we are, as well as a clearer sense of what we can become. Why do we tell stories? We tell stories to inform ourselves. We tell stories so that we can reveal something about ourselves to other people, and in doing so, make an argumentative point. Goes back to first principles first, still has to be a valuable argument in the debate. But in contrast to what we do traditionally, we use forms of narrative. These might include biography, autobiographical narrative, ethnography, legends, fable, music, painting. We can use all of that in a debate, and we use it to undermine an opponent. Sometimes this is evident. This is obvious. There's a passage from Sitting Bull talking about the future of children in the ICWA first affirmative. You could include about the issue of relocation an autobiographical narrative from the Trail of Tears. This is quite profound literature if you have not yet read it. Sometimes the moves might be a bit more abstract. The judge just might not get it. For example, you might decide it's appropriate for you to do a dance as part of a first affirmative or a first negative presentation. Or you might go to the back of the room where a judge is seated, and you might slip off the judge's shoes and begin to wash their feet in animal blood. The judge might not get it. What's going on? And so there is, I think, I try not to use too much math, but I think there's an inverse relationship between the kind of presentation one needs to be successful and the markers that are available in it. And the effectiveness of a presentation needs to have a number of markers. It's not enough just to perform in a debate. You've got to explain to a judge why it is you're performing and what, in fact, you're doing. You have to explain the value of your discourse, and you have to do it as a debate argument. Why is it that this particular discourse is included? How does it advance your interest in winning the debate? In other words, what advantage is produced by it? How does it undermine what the other side is doing in the debate? Questions about that to this point? Let's talk about irony. Near and dear to my heart, and not very far from our current topic. There are problems associated with the presentation of irony in debate. And the biggest problem is this is not a literate community. It is not a literate community. By that I don't mean that people can't read. You're spending most of your day reading, so I know you can read. What I mean is that people don't read literature. They don't read novels, they don't read poetry, they don't read where we get grand ideas, they don't read about the manipulation of language. So we have arguments like topicality because everyone who's involved in debate seems to forget that we have a genre of literature, not a text here or there, but a genre of literature that says, you know what, we can be imprecise, we don't have to give notice, we can mangle semantic and grammatical structure, and you know what we can do with that? We can produce meaning. And that's what we do in poetry. And if you want answers to topicality arguments, guess what you do? You go to poetic criticism. And you will find plenty of pieces of evidence that say precisely what I just did. We do it to create meaning, and it's the way in which we understand the world. And we understand the world metaphorically. And even the negative can't escape from this in the debate. They're always talking about the cards that are being read. There aren't any cards being read in the debate. They're always talking about their ground. They don't need more soil. And so they're even unable to escape from the kind of metaphorical constructions that they introduce. And so it's important for us, if we want to advance arguments that I think are creative and valuable, it's important for us to read the literature in which they're included. And so I think it's a good idea to read ironic texts if one wants to perform an ironic presentation in a debate. Not so shocking an idea. Let's examine the literature, and then we can use it for argument. Irony is the staged opposition of ideas, and it's about a double meaning, an obvious, superficial meaning. In this case, it would be, at least if the issue is the affirmative support for the resolution. And then a secondary, a background, a subtly hidden meaning. It's implied, it's what's really meant. And what's meant is, I don't like the resolution. I don't support it. My arguments resist it. And typically, it's some kind of laudatory expression. Let's go for it. Let's completely embrace the resolution. It's a powerful idea. Let's love it. But it's a dysfunctional relationship because what you really mean is something else. You're assaulting the resolution through agreement with the resolution, rather than finding a place in the resolution. There are obviously many popular examples of ironic constructions, and for all of you who have watched The Simpsons or seen any comedy in the past 10 years, almost all of it's based on ironic musings of a sort. If any of you read Jonathan Swift, Swift is a brilliant ironist, and Swift has a lot to say about debate. Anyone read Gulliver's Travels? When Gulliver encounters the Winhams, well, the Winhams speak in moral absolutes, and they are hyper-rationalist creatures, and they have the shape of a horse. And what's Swift's point? When Gulliver is so enamored of the Winhams, yeah, you can listen to people who speak in absolutist claims. This is a priority. This is a voting issue. This is a decision rule. And they also do so about issues of rational argumentation. And Swift's point, yeah, you listen to those people, you end up talking to horses. And you can identify in literature, excuse me, powerful examples of ironic constructions that can inform you about the nature of this topic. And I'll give some examples about what one could do in a debate with this. One, and I don't want to say this out of any sense of pride, it's just that I'm familiar with it. There was a case that we argued last year that said there's a lot of hunger within the greater Horn of Africa, and so what we need to do is build hundreds of thousands of McDonald's franchises. Because, you know, what do you do when you're hungry? You go to McDonald's. And where's the information about what we should do with McDonald's franchises in Africa? Well, it's McDonald's who tells you that. You go to the McDonald's website, and they'll tell you this is a form of cultural renewal. Yes, sorry, I can't quite see, so just yell out stuff at me.
Like, how do you deal with the issue of, like, if you present something in an ironic format,
Yeah.
that offends the other person that's in the room, like, to the point where either they don't want to be there, or two, they cannot control their emotional, like,
Yeah.
feelings they have.
Oh. Well, I don't understand why someone is upset if they recognize that it's ironic. Because the idea that you're expressing is that they're appreciating it in a non-ironic way. They're upset because they're operating at a superficial level. They're saying that that's offensive because they don't get it. And if they did get it, they would recognize that the construction that you're advancing is one that's arguing development is a bad idea. McDonald's is a dangerous corporation when we talk about the way in which they interact with people within the greater Horn of
Or
Africa.
what if it's not the way you present it or what you present, it's a subject that you present in an ironic way, like.
Well, there's always that issue. I mean, you could argue all kinds of offensive cases on this particular topic in a non-ironic way. Federal control of Native people, whoa, back off. 500 years of genocide and colonialism, and you make that argument? I mean, what happens in any debate? This is why I say, treat all these the way you treat any argument in a debate. Do people stand up and walk out in that kind of debate? No, they hang in there. And so I think that what people do when they do that in the circumstance of an ironic presentation or another narrative is they exaggerate the way in which they're upset, and they try to do it because they can't develop arguments. And after all, if the other side leaves the debate, who wins? I think you do, don't you? I would hope so. A judge votes for the team that forfeits. The other team never showed up. I always vote for them. They must be upset about something. And I think I can find it in the presentation of the affirmative. So I think that the point that you need to make is that you have to have enough markers in the speech to indicate to people that you're engaged in an ironic presentation. But at the same time, I don't think you want to give the benefit of the doubt to people who simply don't get it. Because when is it satisfactory to say in a debate, listen to the first affirmative, I don't get it, therefore I win. You know, we have these kind of arguments. What do we call them? Abuse arguments? Anti-intellectual nonsense? Yes, first one to lose the most arguments wins the debate. This is another example that someone might express in a debate. You have to be careful to account for those issues. Now, is irony a particularly valuable construction? Well, of course, there are people who will say that. You can find cards for everything. But Linda Hutchin, who writes about it, says, irony's edge gives it status as a survival skill, a tool for acknowledging complexity, a means of exposing or subverting oppressive hegemonic ideologies, and an art for affirming life in the face of objective troubles. And what's she really talking about here? She's talking about the way in which we exchange ideas about public policy in America. We have two parties that aren't really opposed on issues. And so when we use the language that we have available for discussing public policy matters, should we take a liberal voice, should we take a conservative voice, when they're both saying the same thing, you don't really get a debate. And so the point of irony is that you can agree with that perspective. Oh yeah, there's that perspective, that liberal conservative perspective, And I will go outside that perspective by demonstrating what happens when I agree with those issues in a debate. And I think that this is the logic associated with it. The context of the argument is usually quite apparent. It's not masked at all. I don't think anyone would be fooled on a topic about within the Greater Horn of Africa to listen to a presentation in which someone says, we're going to feed people McDonald's, and exclusively reads evidence from McDonald's about that as a solution to starvation for 16 million people. Nor do I think on this current topic that anyone would be fooled if you want to make a move in favor of arguing an ironic presentation and saying, no federal control, this is your argument, no federal control, and the way in which you reveal that to everyone is saying, you know what, the federal government does need to control throughout Indian country. We need more federal control because, after all, the Native Americans can't take care of themselves. We've known that for years. That's why we relocated them and put them on reservations. And now we need to make sure that we continue to regulate their practices, because otherwise, you know, they'll do harm to themselves as they did prior to the arrival of Europeans. After all, they didn't have freeways. Yes?
It goes back to what Winston was saying, that like last year, I know there was an ironic topic about how there was ironic, like give Northland to every woman in Africa because the black population cannot, subdue itself from random acts of childbearing. It's like bad way of describing it, but so basically what they're saying.
I love that expression.
The black people.
The random act of childbearing.
I don't know what that was. But
hey, Mom. I don't know what happened. It was just a random act of childbearing.
Anyway, but like specifically the
Tuna, I'm going to have to leave the institute. It was a random act of childbearing. Sorry.
I deserve that. But like specifically.
Oh, I'll be using it for years to come.
Can't wait. So people can get truly offended by that. Like if you don't know the other team, you don't know what the other team's doing, you go back to the question, begs the question.
Yeah, can't we get
What
thicker
is the neg
skins?
supposed to do?
Oh, I'll talk about that in a moment.
The point is to make it very implicit that you're running a plan like that in an ironic way, isn't it?
Well, most of the affirmatives I hear, I appreciate as an ironic statement, because I just can't even believe that they'd do that. But could we really have a topic saying the United States should go to Southeast Asia and increase security assistance? After Vietnam? Are you kidding me? And anyone who would endorse that, I'd think, well, I'll appreciate it ironically, because I want to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not genocidal. That's what I think about the topics. We can always find in our topics, and I'm not sure of the reason why, they're constructed this way, but it seems to me they are always constructed ironically because they always take an oppressive view of the world.
How just outrageous should it be? I mean, the more outrageous, the better.
No, you're making an argument. You're making an argument. It needs to be done seriously. It's not parody. It's not satire. It's not silliness. You're making a serious argument. When you read ironic constructions in the literature, you'll find that they are deft and subtle and clever. There's a brilliant letter that Frederick Douglass wrote when he became the owner of his own newspaper to his former slaveholder. And he wrote a message to him in which all he did was captured the rhetoric and the language that was denied him as a slave. And so it's beautiful prose. That alone was sufficient in a culture in which slaves were not allowed to read and write. But he went beyond it. He was deferential. He referred to him as sir and was very polite, and it was a biting, stinging commentary. And everyone knew the point that he was trying to make. People recognized that disagreement. If you read Swift, He makes these arguments in a powerful way, but they are also subtle and clever. In the same way that a first affirmative typically doesn't reveal everything, yeah, and they don't have red flags in the first affirmative in all these circumstances in which the first affirmative is just doing a standard thing, and they're saying, all right, and here's my next argument. Oh, by the way, this is a turn. We're going to use it to the following disads. You can make subtle arguments. Let's treat these things the same way we treat all these other arguments in a debate. Let's not allow people to say, I don't get it. Let's not allow people to say, you've got to say it in a way that I can appreciate it. Just make your argument, convince the judge of that, do it in a way in which you construct it, you design it in an effective way, and it seems to me that's enough. This is what we expect in any affirmative.
When you said that when you listen to affirmatives who advocate the resolution, you give them the benefit of the doubt that they're presenting in an ironic way.
Yeah.
But that would be based on...
I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that based on, like, your bias towards the topic? Like, you can't possibly imagine somebody actually advocating that, even if that's what they're doing.
What else?
My question is...
Yeah, what else do I have other than my biases?
How do you know the judge in the back is going to have, like, when you talk about irony in your speech, how do you know they're not going to have the same bias that you have in order to pick up on that ironic presentation?
The thing is, you never know what the judge thinks. And you never know the way in which they think about the arguments as they're presented in your round, even if they say before the debate, you know what, I really like politics arguments. Because at the end of the debate, they might say, gee, you know, I like politics arguments except for yours. And you never know what the judge is going to do. And debating is the way in which you make a presentation to control what the judge is thinking. It's not about the other team. Get out of your head that the debate is against the other team. It's about the judge. You need to co-opt the space in the judge's head. There's a lot of space in the judge's head. You've got to co-opt it. You've got to make sure that you control that information. You're debating against all those biases that the judges have. Don't listen to judges who say they're tabula rasa. Don't listen to judges who say, I'm an objective arbiter of what happens in a debate. They're not. You can't control the biases that you have in an absolutist way. You can identify them and resist them for the purposes of paying attention and making sure that a debate is engaged by the debaters. But you have biases, and you need to make sure that you appreciate them rather than to surrender to them, and there's quite a difference. So I don't know that you can control the information without making an effective argument. And that's all I'm saying. Make an effective argument. And if you do, you can control the debate and what the judge thinks about the debate in the same way that you do it with any debate. I mean, there are judges who don't like topicality arguments. Steve Woods never votes for a topicality argument, and maybe has one time in the last 15 years. It doesn't, Steve talks about it all the time, doesn't stop people from arguing topicality in front of him. They still do it, round after round after round. Judges will say, I don't like politics arguments. You get the same reaction. Judge will say, I don't like politics arguments. Yeah, got two off case. The first one's politics. Yes?
Considering that especially about last year,
Yeah.
what's to stop the negative from saying, yeah, you're right, we realize the irony, and you're saying we think the resolution sucks, that's why you need to engage.
Cool. I'd love that if I were on the affirmative, wouldn't you? Pick your affirmative. Doesn't have to be irony. The negative says, gee, yeah, like the case. I don't know how the negative wins that debate.
Well, because you're negating the resolution. I mean, like,
No, you're not.
Another,
You're not negating the resolution. You're supporting the resolution. Your plan supports the resolution. It's an ironic presentation, but it supports the resolution.
so you are saying the United States federal government should substantially increase development assistance to Ukraine or that.
That's what the plan does. You're supporting the resolution.
But ironically, isn't it saying that the resolution sucks?
Well, you have a different meaning about what that language says, but you're supporting the resolution. Your plan says precisely what the resolution says. And after all our affirmatives interpret the resolution in different ways.
So when the judge would be voting for the affirmative, they would be voting to affirm the resolution in an ironic way.
The judge never votes for affirming the resolution. The judge just picks the team that wins the debate, and in this case, you're just saying, I got a better argument than they do. And they need to engage us about this issue.
How would you technically mark that you're doing it ironically and technically
Oh, good
explain
point.
the better advantages of doing it ironically and what the impacts are?
I've experimented with both of these. Sometimes just making an ironic presentation by itself in the opening speech. On the Southeast Asia topic, I coached a debater, and she's Korean, and she argued that the United States should send lots of military equipment to Indonesia to slaughter Asian people, because it was a good idea to slaughter Asian people in the interests of multinational development from the United States. And there were enough judges who didn't quite get that. They didn't think it would be odd at all for a Korean to be arguing, yeah, let's slaughter Asian people. They didn't see that as expressing something about her own survival. And so sometimes you just need more markers. We actually pinned pro-war cartoons to Cecilia to make it clear to some judges that, yeah, she was making an ironic presentation. There are other circumstances, and the one I sort of most recently hit on was you make your presentation, and then you say in the last 2 minutes of the speech, here's the non-ironic part of our presentation in the opening speech, and you say, this is what we're talking about, to make it clear to judges about it, so you actually comment on your speech.
So how do we negate ironic?
Yes, let me just get a couple more questions, then I'll talk about that.
How do you explain the advantages?
Well, you have to have an explanation as to why it's a good argument, and that's really what you're doing. And there are advantages, as I was reading, about the values associated with narrative discourse and irony, and in those passages there are about 4 or 5 different issues that are expressed. And there's a literature on every topic that says these ideas are better understood ironically. We've always been able to find evidence saying about this issue, we should make an ironic presentation, including McDonald's within the Greater Horn of Africa. There's evidence saying that we go back and forth about development, and we never get the point. And what we really need to do is talk about McDonaldization of the world, and in particular in Africa, in an ironic way. And so it's possible to research these issues the same way you research any issues. Yes?
Well, I don't know, like, when you are presenting your plan ironically, you're obviously kind of against the plan that you're presenting.
No, you're in favor of the plan.
You're in favor of the plan, but you present it ironically. So
Correct.
like, how are you in favor of the plan if you're... Like,
You're in favor of the presentation that you're making. That's the only way to make an ironic presentation, is to support what you're saying. You are trying to argue that something's bad by agreeing with it, rather than disagreeing with it. And so the agreement part has to occur. You're supporting your rhetoric in the debate, and debaters might choose to even do this in cross-ex. And so about the example that I gave a moment ago, should the United States kill people in East Timor for multinational development, people in cross-ex would say to Cecilia, are you really saying that we should kill the East Timorese? And her reply, kill them all. Well, she is continuing the issue of agreement, which is the proof that one makes that it's an ironic presentation. And that's what you're trying to do. And so you are making an argument by agreement rather than disagreement. Remember when Kate was talking about a problem that we have in debate? Rams butting heads, everything's about resistance. Arguments don't have to be about resistance. They can also be about agreement. Anyone read Sun Tzu's The Art of War? So much of it is about the way in which one carries out warfare by agreement rather than by disagreement. Taught now in war colleges around the world. She also offered, which I think is a very profound explanation as well, of the martial arts. You use the strength of an opponent against them. And how do you do that? By agreeing with them, not by disagreeing with them. They make a move, and you help them with their move. And they end up on the ground, of course, but you assist them. And so this is the foundation for it. You're not really arguing against the resolution. You are really arguing in favor of the resolution. All your rhetoric is directed that way, and you're arguing that it's the agreement with the resolution that in fact undermines the opposition positions in the debate. Other questions before I talk about answering?
One quick question about the ironic performance.
I think that it's in some ways it's really beautiful for someone to say like, I completely recognize how repugnant real life is, and instead of hiding it under like this mask of like benevolence and, you know, PC, we're just going to expose the evil and just look at it for what it is. But I think that, you know, and if it is argued strategically and in an intelligent, subtle way, maybe it is a good argument. But in my experience, I've seen some ironic cases where the debaters didn't know that it was an ironic case, and they were arguing an ironic case in such a disrespectful way that I think that it was almost used as a tool to re-edify like the things it was meant to point out. And so how do you feel about irony cases that are being run by teams in like a racist, repugnant way?
I can't fault debaters for bad arguments. I just can't. This is a learning activity. There are always going to be more bad arguments than good arguments. And so I don't hold it against debaters for making bad arguments. I think it's part of the way in which we learn about the event. And I don't think debaters go into a debate and they're carrying out a white supremacist agenda. At least it hasn't been my experience that that's been the case, even when these kinds of arguments or that kind of rhetoric is used. And I just don't find it very different in the case of discourse-based affirmatives or negative arguments compared to what happens in a routine debate. And we accept all this in other debates. Think about what's argued in many debates. Think about debates this way. We have these big impact analyses in debates. And quite frankly, most of the impact analyses are strict utilitarian calculi, and they simply say, you save 50,000 lives, you know, you kill 100,000 people, I win. Well, isn't there something really disturbing about that, in which we would agree to sacrifice so many people? I mean, I'm not sure what's so different between that and Hitler's rhetoric. You know, greater good for the greater number. And we can exterminate a small number of people because we're protecting a larger number of people. A lot of what's said in debate routinely may be quite offensive, may be genocidal. It might be important to expose that in those rounds to reveal to people you're not doing anything differently in the rounds in which you have a narrative presentation or an ironic presentation. And I hope that that does get exposed. But I don't really think that anything is different in these kinds of presentations than what you normally get, a mix of good or bad. Let me, before we go on too long, talk about answering these arguments. Where's my ground? You've taken all my arguments. I've got these tubs. I can't use any of my arguments. You've taken my ground. This is abusive. Where's my ground? I can't run any of my politics disads. I've prepared for a long time. Those are 20 arguments. No, it's not. It's one long anti-intellectual rant. I don't have any arguments? Then guess what? You lose debates. Get it together and come up with arguments. This is how you win debates. It's not satisfactory to say that. Can't you say this in every debate? Just show up with a bunch of tubs that have nothing to do with the topic. I've researched all these arguments that have nothing to do with Native Americans. You're talking about Native Americans. Now I can't use any of my negative arguments. Therefore I win. Stop this nonsense. There are no abuse arguments in a debate. It's possible to answer arguments. Go ahead and do it. Here are 3 methods to do it. First, investigate the basis of the issue as argument. Investigate the basis of the issue as argument. Investigate ideas, stories, etc. in the same way that you'd investigate any argument in a debate based on its consistency, its scope, its relevance, whether or not one could minimize it, whether or not one could turn it, which is good transition, to the second issue. Ambiguity works against stories. Ambiguity works against stories. It's possible to have all kinds of interpretations of texts. And it's possible to identify other interpretations and spin the story. You know about Bush's 1,000 points of light. You know, makes this error in a presidential debate. Everyone sees the presidential car crash, but by the time the day is over, we've got a 1,000 points of light foundation, recognizing people in communities. So you can spin the story, looks bad, ends up being beautiful. We could do this with the affirmative that you were given, the ICWA affirmative. You know, what's the affirmative saying with that case? It's about the children. It's about the children. We have to return the children to their communities. What about the children who've lived as adopted children for a long time and don't want to go? Then it's about the state ripping children from their homes. What about when the state refuses to provide any resources to those communities or to their new families? Then it's about moving children from safe harbor to dysfunctional communities. It is the movement of Jewish children from England in 1934 to Germany. That's the story that one can spin. You can do this with any story. The affirmative presents a story, ironic, non-ironic, autobiographical, legend, musical performance. Spin the story. Finally, you can present a counter story. You can present a counter story. Be careful about this. In this way, it's a debate. It's a zero-sum game. It's got to compete. It's got to explain why you win. And so it's possible to come up with another presentation. But having another presentation isn't enough. Someone presents a narrative, you can't just say, I've got an ironic construction. Somebody has an autobiography, you can't just say, let's do a dance. It's necessary to explain in the debate as to why you've got an argument that's focused. It's important to introduce this idea in the debate. It's a focused issue, and it undermines what you're doing. And in those methods, there are plenty of arguments available for any narrative construction, ironic presentation, performance that debaters have. It is all about arguments. Think about them in exactly the same way you think about other issues. Anticipate them, which you're able to do on this topic more easily, I think, than other topics because it's so tightly wound into the literature on the topic, and you will be able to prepare answers to those positions. Questions about that?
Can you give us an example of where a story would be able to beat another story?
Well, I thought I just did on ICLA.
How about an argument against your McDonald's affirmative?
Well, there are no arguments against that one, but I'm sorry. There are all kinds of ideas that one can spin about that. There are elements associated. If I just say, McDonald's is a dangerous issue for globalization, well, think about the assumptions associated with that. That there shouldn't be any transfer of technology and services from developed countries to developing countries. And that there's nothing associated with this tale that might actually assist other countries developing the skills associated with their own survival. There's profound literature that said what we need is technical assistance. With technical assistance, then countries become self-sufficient. And then they throw off the spurs associated with colonialism. The countries aren't ready to be nationalized. They're ready to be independent. And that's what people want. And they, in fact, use globalization. Globalization no longer uses them. And so it's possible to take that kind of argument and find information on the topic about it so that you could spin that kind of ironic presentation. Other questions?
If the negative, it really just isn't getting it, and they try to turn it into like a plan. They present like a counter plan or a topical counter plan or something. Try to turn it into this plan kind of thing. How do you show that the ironic view you're espousing here is the better way to look?
Same thing you do in any debate. It doesn't compete, and you make your arguments as to why negative arguments have to compete. It is the case that with these kinds of affirmatives, you're frequently faced with negative positions that do not compete. So you have to prepare to answer that. But you already know that. You already have to debate against critiques that don't compete. You already have to debate against counterplans that don't compete. This is just another argument where many of the negative positions don't compete.
At what point does the ask stop being ironic? Let's say in the following speeches.
Well, it depends on the nature of the arguments in the debate. Actually, the construction that I said, I think worked best in explaining this idea was a combination of ironic and non-ironic claims. So you educate the judge about what you're trying to accomplish in a more open way. And then you get, as a reply to that, both ironic and non-ironic arguments. And so there are issues of both throughout the debate. And certainly one would want to continue to argue, as I did, that the topic interpretation as irony is with agreement. And so you're always giving ironic interpretations for topicality answers. But it really depends on the argument choice from the negative more than anything else.
But wouldn't the app, with whatever the neg was saying, if they were actually hitting something, the app would always be able to say, well, I was being ironic.
No, you cannot always be ironic. This is the issue of constructing a specific argument. You cannot simply say, oh, and that's ironic. I've certainly experienced negative strategies in which people just run their regular argument set, and at the end they say, oh, and that's ironic. You're trying to construct an irony for a particular purpose, and you're supporting that purpose with evidence and making an argument. This is about a focused presentation, not just labeling stuff. For example, you could do this for any argument that you presented in a debate. But they flipped my diss ad, I got no answers, and you just say, ah, this is just ironic. Try that out if you don't have any answers.
So then you keep your answers, your affirmative. Do you keep your answers for, like, you know, kill all the Asians, separate from the listed as ironic?
This is the kind of thing where it's hard to say as a rule. Okay. I'm just saying you have to create an irony. Sometimes that might include additional ironic claims. Sometimes it might include performance. And then there are circumstances in which you might want to make non-ironic arguments, either in your own interest or to answer negative arguments. If people have additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't want to cut into your lunchtime. And if anyone wants to hear my attack on Forrest Gump, I'd also be willing to do that as well.